We're continuing with our discussion of the pieces of a project by moving on to objects. In FF&EZ, an object is the finished product that the client will see in each room. An object can be anything whose quantity can be specified by a unit of measure. So chairs, faucets, window treatments, these are all objects. But so are a square foot of carpet and a linear foot of baseboard. In FF&EZ, each object is composed of one or more component specifications that use a certain quantity per object. Looking at the object list screen, you can see that the object is a very simple thing. It only has a few fields. This is because its details come from the specification that you attach to it. And that means that anytime you switch out a specification, you can switch out the meaning of the object, such as changing a fabric. Specifications can be attached, removed, or replaced in a number of ways. But the easiest way to do it is as you create the object, which I will show you in a couple of examples. First, let's create a simple object that you might do at the beginning of a project, such as a lamp. I'll click on the Add command, then enter the basic information. The tag is the object's ID, but it's meant to relate directly to the ID you would use to label a drawing symbol, so it's slightly different from a spec ID. Normally, though, most spec IDs are set to be the same as the tag just for convenience. This project already uses a tag scheme in which light, L-I-G-T, is the tag group for lighting. So we'll follow that example and create light 14. For class, we'll use FRN. There are 5 classes though. For the description, we'll enter a generic functional description. Although it might include a reference to location, you should really avoid this if the object might be used in many different places. Finally, we'll have to enter a unit of measure, and since this is a single item, we can use each. When I enter the E, FF&EZ fills in the rest for me. We'll leave budgets off right now, but that can be used to build a budget of all the items in a project and compare them to room budgets, area budgets, and project budgets. This is all that's really needed to create an object. But since every object needs at least one specification for the product that will be used, FF&EZ offers to create a placeholder spec. Just below the object fields, you'll see that it has pre-filled the type of information that we did manually for the nightstand. Since no other specification for this lamp exists in the current project, we'll accept that and click on Save. The new object is now in the list, and the component list contains the specification that was created. If you move to the specification list, you'll see that Light 14 is in there as a placeholder spec, just like the one we created earlier. This can be detailed whenever actual product selection occurs, and the object itself does not need to be changed any further. Now let's create something a little bit more complex. We'll go back to the object screen, and I'll click on Add. We're going to create an upholstered lounge chair. So our tag prefix for seating is SEAT in this project, and I'll create seat 34. The class is still furnishings, and the description will be chair lounge with a unit of measure of each. And down below, just like before, it has created the placeholder information for us. But we know we're going to be using a separate fabric, so we're going to add a second placeholder spec. And we'll have to make up a spec ID, but we'll go ahead and use COM 34 for this. Now, you may be using fabrics in more than one object, so the matching of the spec ID to the main chair frame may not be a crucial thing that you have to stick with. This description, we'll call it fabric for lounge chair. But again, if it's going to be used for a sofa too, that would be too much detail, and you want to make it more generic. Unit of measure is yards. Vendor is still TBD, and then it's going to ask for a quantity used in the object. So if this chair used 3.5 yards of fabric, you would put that in this spot. At this point, we don't know because we haven't actually made a product selection, so we'll leave it at 0, and then we'll save this object. Now the system will warn us that we left that at 0 because that does have to be filled in eventually. And FF&EZ has some special filters used to spot unentered numbers like this. But we're going to say yes, we want to keep on going, and the system will save it. And now we have seat 34, and up in the object list, but down here we have the two specs that have been created to fill in. You'll notice also that the cost and the quantity being 0 are in red in these displays. Also, you'll notice that this has not been used yet in the FF&E worksheet, which we'll get to, but this would not show up on the reports for the client or for ordering until it's actually placed in a room. That's the definition of being used. If we wanted to actually edit this spec, I could simply click on it and then double click, and the specification list would come up in edit mode, ready for you to put information and detail this chair. When I save or revert, I'll be taken back to the object list. Let's look at one other thing about creating an object. I'll click on Add real quick and then enter the tag for that casework that we entered a few minutes ago. Case 22, the nightstand. When I move off of the tag, you'll notice down here under the placeholder spec that FF&EZ has found the fact that case 22 exists already and is offering to make that the primary component instead of just a placeholder. Of course, you can select this option manually if there's any other existing spec that you'd like to use. And if you want to create a spec that's more than just a placeholder, like the one above, you can use this new button to add a spec to this pick list and then select it as the primary spec. The same kind of option applies on the secondary component also. Now I'm going to cancel this. There are two other ways to create an object on the screen. First, you can clone one. When you clone an object, the idea is typically that you're cloning an object that has more than one component in it, and you're planning to switch one of those components. The most common example might be to create a chair with a different fabric. And so you would click on the clone button, supply a new tag. You can leave everything else the same, or you might add something like blue or alternate or something like that and save it. And when it comes in, you're going to have the exact same components. They're going to be both pointing to the same specs on the spec screen. And so what you then do is click on the fabric, choose a different fabric or create one, as I mentioned earlier, and then replace the one that's on the list. And now you've got a completely different fabric with the same chair frame. The final way that you can add a new object to the screen is to import it. To do that, we click on Add and then click on the Import option. This brings up a list of all of the other objects in the system, and then we can narrow that list down by project or by type, and then pick the object that we want to import. When we select that object, it's going to tell us if there are any conflicts, and what that means is that the incoming specs that go with that object may conflict with the existing specs with the same spec ID. So we just need to resolve that. I already know that this object is not a match for anything that's already in the system, so we're going to give it some new spec IDs. So this will become 44, and the seat itself we're going to call seat 44, and then we'll accept those changes, and it shows no conflicts, so I'll accept that. And then my tag, it'll yell at me if I try to use seat 01, because that's already been used in this project too. So I'll change that to seat 44, then save it. And then finally it'll remind me that the specs that came in need to be double checked, just in case there are alternate shipping addresses and pricing and things like that need to be changed. That's it. The new object is in the system. It could be a fully detailed item, or it could be some type of skeleton or prototype object that's already pre-filled with certain boilerplate items in the specs. We've now covered the what part of what goes where. Now let's move to the other end and answer the where part of the question by looking at the area and room list screens. First, we'll move to the area list. The area list screen is a simple one. All that is needed to define an area is the area ID, which is the only ID in the system that allows mixed case letters, and the subproject ID, which is required, but you can select the default subproject when you create an area. You can also enter a budget for each area, either in the data area, where we're looking right now, or in the list itself, where it can be directly entered. Area budgets are rolled up to compare to the project budget. Continuing on our tour of the screens, let's move to the room list. Rooms are also fairly straightforward. Each is part of an area, so this must be selected or created. Then a unique room ID is needed, and then the room's name. Each room can be assigned a budget that is rolled up for comparison to the area's budget and to the combined budgets and costs for the room's contents. One of the most powerful features of FF&EZ is the ability to use a room as a prototype in a project. This is done by entering a room count greater than the one in the prototype quantity field. When you do this, FF&EZ calculates all the product quantities in that room and the extended costs using the room count as part of the calculation. The clone command on this screen is another powerful tool. Like other clone commands, it copies the fields from the source room. However, since a room is also defined by its contents, cloning a room also copies the occurrences of all the objects in the room, making it easy to create variations of a room type by adding or removing objects or changing their quantities after the copy is done. Now, by occurrences we mean our specified use of the objects, not the actual objects. Each object only exists once on the object list screen, so an object listed in a cloned room still points to the same object as the one in the original room. That means that an update to an object or its components always show up in any rooms where it's used. This differs from the way that spreadsheets work, because in a spreadsheet, unless you're maintaining complicated links to cells with vendor names, you've got to copy all the data to update changes across your database. Now we'll look at one last feature that's very useful to designers who work with predefined room types, the room import command. This command is accessed by selecting the add command and then the import option. This brings up a display of all the rooms in your other projects with the ability to narrow the search to a project or room type, such as looking for all the queen rooms. Once you select a room, it'll bring up a display of conflicts between the source tags and the spec IDs and the ones that are already in your project. If you already know that these are the same, then you can use the current. If any of them are really different, then you can use this column for new spec ID or new tag to change the tag and the spec ID. We're going to accept use current because these all were pulled from a project that we've used before. So we'll accept the changes and then accept the room, and then all we have to do is save it. After we change the name, we're going to use 22 for double queen alternate and save that. And now we get a warning or a reminder to check the specs to make sure that they're being shipped to the proper vendors. Earlier we covered the what in the question, what goes where and how much is needed, by showing how to create objects and their component specifications. Now we've covered the basics of where. In the next segment we'll show how it all comes together.